Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this month's Road Women meeting. We are having a wonderful town hall tonight with DA Kim Ogg, moderated by Doug Miller. But I wanted to make sure that everyone has some chances to get on while we're streaming this live on Facebook and on YouTube. I want to make sure that if you have any questions, I let you know to go ahead and put it in the comment section. We will be receiving those and getting them to our moderator to ask DA Ogg. So please make sure to get those questions into us and we will do that. Before we get started, I do want to make sure that I also tell you that we are having a fundraiser on Friday, this Friday, the 25th at 6:30. We are premiering a locally made film before it goes to distribution by a local filmmaker, Sharon Ferranti. She is near and dear to Carly Mosier and my heart. She was a teacher of ours at HSPVA. So please, if you are able to join us to help us get out the vote in November, we are working our tails off to do that with a texting program and phone banking, and all of that obviously does not come cheap. So it's only $20.20. So if you are able to join us on Friday at 6:30, we'd love to have you. Without further ado, our moderator, Doug Miller, is a retired Houston journalist who's covered everything from the cop shop to Capitol Hill during his 4 decades in television, radio, and newspaper industries. His career began while he was still in high school hosting a radio talk show in El Paso. As managing editor of the Houston Business Journal, he covered the collapse of the Texas energy and real estate industries. At KHOU TV, Houston's CBS affiliate, he spent more than 20 years specializing in government and politics, including a tour of duty as KHOU's Washington bureau chief, during which he covered Congress, the White House, and various presidential campaigns. Miller served as a panelist on more than a dozen live televised debates between candidates for everything from mayor to governor to president. After his retirement from KHOU in 2016, he served on the editorial board of the Houston Chronicle. Now, he's at Rice University serving as the director of news and media relations. And a curious footnote, in 1985, he became the first Houstonian to appear on the syndicated production of Jeopardy! And over the course of 4 days on the quiz show, he won $16,000. So please welcome Mr. Doug Miller.
Oh, well, thanks a lot, Kat. I really appreciate that. And I sure appreciate the invitation this evening. I remember the last time I came to a Road Women event, and somebody mentioned the Jeopardy thing afterward. Nobody talked to me about what we talked about in the event. They wanted to know about Jeopardy. They want to know about Alex Trebek. But I really appreciate the invitation this evening. And as I mentioned to you last night, Kat, anybody who's a friend of my old friend Diane Mosier is a friend of mine. So I'm happy to be here. And I'm especially happy to be able to talk with our district attorney here in Harris County, Kim Ogg. Now, I suspect there are some people who are going to be watching this particular event this evening who don't know Kim Ogg's history. So for those who don't know this, Kim Ogg's history with the Harris County DA's office goes back for decades. It was way back in the 80s that I first ran into her at the DA's office. In 1987, she was a prosecutor during a very different era in that office. The DA back then was this guy named Johnny Holmes. For those of you who aren't old enough to remember, Johnny Holmes was this legendary guy, this tough-talking Republican with a handlebar mustache. One of his prosecutors said that he ran the DA's office the way Patton ran the Third Army. He also, during his period of tenure, made Harris County into the at the time the death penalty capital of the United States. That says something about just the mood, I suppose you'd say, the law and order mood of the DA's office back then. Right. In 1994, it was our then mayor, Bob Lanier, who named her as the first Houston anti-gang task force director. And then she stayed there for a few years. In 1999, I believe it was, she went over to Crime Stoppers of Houston and was the executive director of that organization. She went into private practice after that with her father. And her father, for those of you who don't know, was State Senator Jack Ogg. She first ran for DA back in Kim, correct me on this if I'm wrong, 2014. Lost in that race, but a couple of years later, as Democrats across the country were watching their televisions in dismay as Donald Trump racked up state after state and the electoral votes that he needed to move into the White House, the mood was somewhat celebratory inside a bar in the Heights because Kim Ogg on that night was elected the district attorney of Harris County. And she's been in that position for almost 4 years now. It's suffice to say they've been 4 very eventful years. But we're going to let her talk about that. So Kim, Gary, can we get Kim up on the screen
Yeah,
here?
we sure can. Thank you for being here, and I will
bet.
go ahead and let you have it.
Okay. So Kim Ogg, our DA, thank you for joining us. This is not your first Road Women rodeo, so a lot of people in this virtual room know all about you. But for people who don't quite know you, let me give you a chance to make sort of an opening statement. What is it you'd like to say to this crowd of Democratic troublemaking road women?
Well, let me say, Doug, for the guy I know you to be, you've still got a boyish and very innocent face, and I think that
listen.
In 2020, I too was tagged by Diane Mosier as a recruit back into the Democratic Party. I had a foray in the mid 90s as a Republican. I think Diane, like many Democrats who knew my family at that time, was most interested in bringing the Democratic Party back into power locally. And she was looking for talent and willing people. And I was interested in running as a Democrat. I'd switched back in the early 2000s, but I hadn't really thought about running. Diane was not just supportive, she brought Road Women, an already put together machine designed to really reintroduce the Democratic Party to women in Harris County. She brought them to the table. I came in, introduced myself. She welcomed me into the race. And from there, we've really made a lot of history. Road Women, so many women candidates, female candidates who Road Women has supported. So I think on the anniversary of so many good things in this country, like the women's movement, suffragette movement, the movement to get the vote. We have a lot to celebrate, but boy, we have a lot of ground to take back. And I am interested in talking not just about what's going on in the DA's office, but about the politics here in Houston. I have great hopes, Doug. I take nothing for granted, but I'm optimistic that Harris County is going to go big for Biden and Harris. And those of us down ballot candidates certainly think that would be helpful to us.
You know, before I get into the DA's office, there's one question that's been in my mind. What do you think about this? No more straight ticket voting. How do you think that's going to affect it? I mean, is that going to hurt you? Is it going to help you? Any impact at all?
Yes, it's going to hurt Democrats. We have been taking the lead in Harris County for the last 4 years. 16 was when we secured it, but we really started making ground in 14. We drew that margin from a classic 10 to 15% difference between D's and R's to about 4%. In 16, we swept. We led the ticket by 108,000 votes. And in 18, we did even better than that. It was a complete sweep. So, I'm optimistic about Houston.
Yeah, complete sweep this time. What do you think?
I hope so. I don't think we should take it for granted. But we've got a strong local ticket. We've got good records. You've had Ann Bennett Harris in the tax assessor collector office, Ed Gonzalez as sheriff, me as DA. You've had a switch in commissioner's court. I think there's a lot of work for us to do, but I think that we've got the confidence of voters. I do think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I hope we get to clear some of that up tonight, Doug.
Let's talk about the DA's office for a moment. You've been there for a little under 4 years now. I want to ask you about what you found when you walked into that office. What did you inherit? What did you feel you had to take care of? What surprised you when you took over the DA's office?
Our office is an institution. It's an organization that's been around for decades, and really since Houston became a city, there's been a strong bar association, courthouse group. The judiciary has people who are civically active. So the institutions like the district attorney's office are critical to smooth transitions during difficult times. And Houston's had plenty of boom and bust economically. We've had our share of climate-driven disasters. And, politically, there's always enough scandals to go around. What I found was an antiquated office, an office that still in many ways was run like Johnny Holmes' office, even by a few of the same people, where it was not so much a governmental organization, but kind of like a small law firm that got bigger and bigger, and original employees started doing larger and larger jobs that they grew into, but it was not automated. It was not techno savvy. And I think Holmes was interested in that when I was there, but I think you had a period of instability. Chuck Rosenthal left the office in disarray and in disgrace. Pat Likas and other Republicans fought over the office for a series of years. Much of that fighting was internal, and it was older culture resisting cultural change. I came in, we had a big change of personnel, and what we did is we found a group of people who were loyal to the institution, and what we needed to know and what we've seen is that they've adapted to a very middle of the road approach with regard to common sense justice. In other words, diverting people and saving lives at the bottom of the scale, low-level offenders, and focusing our prosecutorial resources and the great weight of the law on violent offenders. Most people can live with that balance. And so while I'd say technology was in retrograde at the DA's office, the personnel has been mostly cooperative. But we see cultural resistance every day, and often it's reported. And that's disheartening, because I really think what we have are many public servants who are dedicated to actually representing the people's public safety interest and interest in fair courts in our local courts. And in the third biggest county in the country, that's over 100,000 cases a year. We serve 4.7 million people. We do a lot of it front facing. In other words, protective orders are in person, although now some are virtual. Paying restitution, that's done in person. Reinstating bonds or forfeiting bonds, that's done in person. And of course, all court appearances used to be in person. So while it's an enormous system, we're all together a lot. And I think that unfortunately, there's a lot of weaponization in the criminal justice system. But I remain optimistic that based upon what we found and what we've done to improve the situation with technology, that we're pointed in the right direction, both reform and public safety.
What do you mean by weaponization of the criminal justice system?
Oh my gosh. The DA's office is interesting. People are always interested in crime and punishment. What's going to happen to such and such murder case? Why did so-and-so commit this fraud against so many vulnerable people? So we have interesting stories, but weaponization meaning politically, when things go wrong, these days, there's a lot of blame involved. There's blame about who set the bond, either too high or too low. There's blame if the person gets out and the victim feels like there's no accountability because it takes too long to get to trial. There's just a lot of blame. And I feel like the weaponization within criminal justice sort of diminishes our ability to be effective as a system. I really think I have to be the DA for both parties. And so that down ballot, that straight ticket voting, I think it's going to hurt us a little bit. But in truth, the district attorney's race, we serve everybody. I think there's a crossover vote for some of these county positions. And I think that's going to help Democrats. I don't believe every Republican is going to vote straight Republican. And I think the Democrats, we see an increased responsibility among our base to vote all the way down the ballot. So you see a lot of messaging by Democratic candidates like me saying, you know, Democratic top to bottom. But if you're not a straight ticket voter and you are knowledgeable about races, this gives people the opportunity to really look at it race by race. So we'll see how it turns out. Predict Democrats still doing well right now. We can't make any mistakes, but we've got a strong national ticket, got a strong local ticket. I feel like Democrats should prevail, but boy, it's an uncomfortable optimistic call from my angle, because we can't take anything for granted.
All right, you came in as a reformed DA a few years ago, and I think it surprised a lot of people when you opposed the cash bail reforms for misdemeanor offenders. I saw a report that came out just a few days ago. They had something in the Chronicle about it that apparently it's working. Do you think that was a mistake?
No, I wasn't against misdemeanor bail. There are people who will leverage an extreme label. If you oppose a detail, they want to suggest you're against it altogether. That was weaponized. That's a good example of an issue weaponized, because I don't believe in holding low-level nonviolent offenders who simply can't pay bond in jail. I'm not for that. Economically, it's discriminatory. We see it racially, disproportionately affecting people of color. I'm against all that. What I was trying to bring to the court's attention was, in the implementation, repeat offenders were being released. We've brought those same statistics to the attention of the bail monitors, but I'm not willing to say that this is an unsuccessful bail reform system. Not at all. We've all got to work toward making it successful. So I don't think it's never a mistake to tell the truth or point out the Achilles heels of a program, because that's how you improve it. And we had public safety concerns coming in all over the county, and not just from Republicans, from Democrats too. Why'd you let so-and-so out on bond? Isn't so-and-so a violent offender? Bail is a judicial function. So first of all, there was misinformation being put out. That was purposeful, and that was weaponized. And that's wrong. We want people to participate in our justice system. They have to understand it, and they can't feel like it's unfair if we expect them to participate, and I expect them to participate. So I'm all about getting the truth out there and not weaponizing these issues, even against our Republican opponents. We don't need to. We know how to reform systems, protect public safety, and be fair to people at the same time. And how do people know that? Because we're doing it. Our city did not burn. Saw the expression of free speech. We recognize Black Lives Matter as a genuine and authentic civil rights movement. And we've held police officers accountable here. And our city did not, we faced civil unrest, but it wasn't hostile in terms of violence. It was peaceful. I'm proud of that.
So let me put out the appeal to everyone watching this particular broadcast that we're soliciting questions. If you'd like to submit questions, go ahead and submit them through the chat function here, and we'll get as many of them as we can to our DA Kim Ogg, who is speaking with us right now. Kim, let me ask you this question. I'm just going to read it directly off the. Someone asked, how many people have been released on no cash bail? Any data on that you know of?
No, I think that's a glaring omission in the county's statistical data release. They can't tell us how many people are released on no cash bail, meaning personal recognizance, no money down. Mm-hmm. They can't tell us how many people are on cash bond. And the courts and the clerks keep those records. So it's been amazing to me that the bail monitors were willing to go forward with their report in spite of not having this information. But I feel like they're working on getting it, and that we'll know enough. And then what are we doing to express the nonviolent misdemeanor cases?
I think, yeah. So let me, if I could, Yeah, I think that's what it is. They're asking what I think the question there is, what are you doing to reduce? What can you do, the DA's office, to reduce nonviolent misdemeanor cases, people being locked up during the COVID-19 pandemic?
So our role in bail hearings is to advocate evidence that shows somebody's dangerous or they won't come to court. If we believe they're not dangerous and they will come to court, we don't object. We don't present any evidence. So in these cases of nonviolent misdemeanor cases, the sheriff is not accepting most of those cases anyway. And the people who do come in on nonviolent misdemeanors, we run through the list daily to file lists of non-objections with the sheriff so that they can file them with the court and so that those people are released. That's what we're seeing. There are no real misdemeanor offenders in the jail unless they are there under an ICE warrant or a warrant or in another state. For the most part, nonviolent misdemeanor offenders are not in the Harris County Jail.
All right, so question coming in right now. The question, you can answer it. I think many people know the answer to it, but let's let people know. Can felons vote? Do they have to be current on their fines and papers to be able to vote, as they do in the state of Florida at this point?
They have to be off parole, and it's discretionary with the parole board if fines and fees which are unpaid can be waived. I advocate giving people a second chance at life, that once their time has been served and they've repaid, so to speak, society with the punishment that was agreed upon or rendered by a jury, then they ought to be able to get out of jail and vote. But that's not the law. You have to be off parole. I can see it, but I think we could be more tolerant and in doing so encourage more people to participate in the system.
You know, it's interesting. I think I've run into a couple of people actually have felony convictions, had no idea they could vote. And it's an interesting thing. They think they can't vote anymore, which is odd. Have you run into that as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions and misinformation out there, and it's weaponized by the other party at times. I think we see part of that voter suppression effort directed at people who have had run-ins with the law and who have a criminal record. I think that's one reason it's so important to clean up people's records, whether they have a dismissal, a not guilty, or served out probation. I think it's important to clean those records up. And to that degree, I want to shamelessly plug my Make It Right program, which will be virtual this year, where we offer people free expunctions and non-disclosures if they're eligible, so that we can help them be more qualified to re-enter the workplace, which I personally think is the best crime prevention there is, giving people a job.
So let me ask you something, DA Kim Ogg. When you first came into office, actually shortly before you first came into office, I believe it was close to 40 people left, were terminated, I believe. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, but it seems as though there's been a high turnover in your office. I mean, it really does seem that there are a lot of folks who are leaving. How do you explain that? I mean, to some extent, you can say some of them might be disgruntled employees, but at some point, you scratch your head and wonder why so many people are leaving the DA's office.
Well, there is a culture change that's pretty manifest that's going on. There's not a lot of room for folks who preferred prosecuting, where they determined what was disclosable and not. And there were a number of people whose spouses left, either at my request or on their own. Friends left, and those people leave as well. But in truth, Doug, the district attorney's office is no different than any other public law firm. We've seen consistent turnover in the DA's office over the years. Sometimes it's faster than others, but the district attorney's office pays low and has an enormously high workload. So people do not come to rest there. They come to make their careers and generally move along into private practice. I know that's what I did after 6.5 years. And I see people doing it sometimes at 3 years. We do ask them to stay a minimum of 3. Sometimes others break their commitment. I think that's a sign of maybe changing values about employer-employee relationships. But for the most part, we're on average about the way we always were. Some years more people leave, other years those don't. But we've had some high-profile disgruntled people. And again, weaponizing HR makes the news, makes for, I guess, an interesting story. I think the public is really more interested in whether we're serving them or not. and I want employees who want to work at my office. So I think that it's healthy to some degree, and I would welcome good applicants who don't mind a lot of hard work and want to serve the public and make us safer.
So a question coming in from the public, which this is a softball straight across the plate. Will you be hiring more DAs? I think you'd want to, correct?
Of course, I've been on a push for the most understaffed DA's office in the top 20 cities in America. There's no way to get around that. You can attack the numbers all you want, but we're very understaffed. As it stands, we do have openings, and I'm very interested in people who are committed to changing our system from the inside out, but who have a heart for crime victims and for bringing justice to people. And so we will be hiring more DAs. I think one thing I want this group to know, this culture change that I'm implementing, it's from the top down, and it's not always well received. Example, we used to, this office, the DA's office, only hired from 2 law schools in Harris County. They hired from U of H and they hired from South Texas. And you'd ask them, why don't you hire from TSU? And I got a variety of reasons over the years from different members of the leadership. When I came in, I was determined from the top down and purposefully we would hire from TSU. One, it's a good law school. It's a local law school, and it's local talent. 2, I thought it was fairly discriminatory and pretty facially evident that they didn't want to hire either Black DAs or they didn't want to hire from that law school. So we're now a major employer for all 3 law schools. We've increased our African-American hiring by 91% in the professional ranks. And our Latino hiring, we've increased by 125%. I implemented bilingual pay. Why? Because people who speak more than one language work harder than those of us who only speak one. And so I think these changes are, they are really big changes at the DA's office, changes that were talked about for decades that I'm implementing. And, you got to break a few eggs to bring this much change, Doug.
So a question coming in from the audience. I hate to call audience here because it's the Road Women. This is not an audience, it's a group. But at any rate, question coming in. Asking about campaign donations, I believe here. How much money have you taken from civil attorneys? Talk about that for a moment. Where's your money coming from for your campaign? How much is coming from defense attorneys? How much is coming from the civil bar? Address that, if you would.
The first answer is there's never enough coming in. Our campaign finance laws in America need true reform. And in Harris County, like all over the county, district attorneys take donations from anyone. There are no limits. And where conflicts of interest arise or we learn about them, generally we should give the money back. And that's what I do if there's any conflict of interest. But lawyers who, unless they have a case, they're not generally conflicted. So interestingly, I think most of my money has come from family, friends, small donations around the city, people I've known for a long time. I've had donations from some lawyers. I couldn't tell you exactly what the percentage is, but I will say that lawyers are the ones generally most interested in electing judges and in electing the local public attorneys. So there's a significant amount that we take from civil lawyers. And their interest in good government is not so much that they don't represent people or have a financial interest in the criminal courts, but if their firms are embezzled, if their family's quality of life is impacted, if their clients are defrauded, this harms everyone. And so I think they want a district attorney that's independent, special interests, and that has a heart for victims' rights, and that understands that public safety is integral to good business and good commerce, and that Houston's built on that kind of economy. So we need a DA that works with the business community as well as the general population. And that's what we do.
You know, you bring up the subject of campaign contributions and the fact that judges have to go out and drag the sack around town to retain their positions or to claim their positions in the first place. What sort of system would you favor for choosing judges in the state of Texas?
I would choose nonpartisan elections. There's a lot to be said for retention races where expert panels select candidates to become judges, and then the public has the opportunity to retain or reject them. But what most of us want are minimum qualifications that are enforced. We want to be sure that the people who hold positions of power, like this one, and judicial benches, which have great power over people and issues, we want people to be qualified. And so I would like there to be some type of minimum qualifications that are, I think, greater than they are now. And I hope the legislature considers that. This nonpartisan, this non-straight ticket voting, this has been discussed for years. Neither party in power would ever let it come through. It's interesting that the Republican Party has allowed it now as the state is leaning purple and eventually blue. And I think it's probably a strategic move designed to take away from the Democratic surge. But again, I feel optimistic that folks, at least in urban areas, are going more Democratic than less.
Another question coming in from those watching here. You briefly addressed this before. Talk about the Spanish-speaking staff. You have Spanish-speaking staff to communicate with the Latino community. Talk about that.
Yes, we've made a tremendous effort to ensure that many of our staff, and we're not at 50% yet, but that's where I want to go, that we have a huge number of people who speak Spanish, and it's still not enough. So we're aiming for 50%, and I don't have that percentage, but I'm going to get it. I'll also say that not just Spanish, but translations for at least or almost 30 other languages are something that we have access to. And we use a service to provide that, but it's critical. And even more importantly, we're hiring young DAs and investigators from around the globe. We have an actual international group of attorneys working as prosecutors in the DA's office. This is, to me, wonderful, a real sign of progress, something very different, in a very different state than I found the office in, Doug. You asked me what I found when I walked in. I found, part of the reason that so many people left from the top that I asked to leave is it was very white. It was very one-dimensional. I felt like leadership had to be diversified too, and that there was plenty of talented lawyers. That's why I asked Ruben Perez, Vivian King, David Mendoza, so many talented lawyers to join leadership. Yvonne Taylor, I could go on and on, but I'm proud of my staff. These are well-regarded lawyers, and they're diverse.
Question coming in about police shootings. What sort of special training does the DA's office do? A mandatory training of some sort to handle police shootings? I remember back in the Johnny Holmes days, there were a couple of guys, and they were men, who just did police shootings. What do you do now?
Well, we have a very different civil rights division. Back in the day, Doug, as you recall, Black prosecutors were generally not assigned to the civil rights division, nor were Black investigators, nor were Latino investigators. Some of that changed over time. It was a very small unit, and there were still a lot of police shootings. Very few of them resulted in any kind of indictment. Although even during Johnny Holmes' day, he's the one who implemented the rule that our team would go out, be present at the shooting scene after it had happened for the walkthrough, and then take each case to the grand jury. And I follow that same model. We still do that. Many of the practices that have been developed are best practices. We perform an independent investigation, but we don't collect evidence. The investigating agency does. So it takes months to get the evidence from the investigating agency, who generally employs the shooter. That's what the public is so distrustful of. And I think figuring out who can be an independent body to actually investigate police shootings is something that legislatively should and will be looked at. We don't have mandatory training other than how police are prosecuted when shootings are wrongful. So we teach about evidence, we teach about prosecutorial technique, we teach about process. But since we're not first responders and our employees are not involved in police shootings other than as prosecutors, there's not a mandatory training. I will say we train police officers when invited. And we do talk about civil rights violations and that kind of thing. But I think it's clear policing is changing in America. It's going to be forced to change. And training is at the heart of where change begins. Training and recruitment.
Through the years, I've known an awful lot of police officers, and you have too. And you and I both know that working internal affairs is generally considered punishment when you're a cop. And it sounds like what you believe is that somehow the state needs to take some sort of action so that there is a separate body set up and a separate investigative body set up to investigate police shootings. That you don't want HPD investigating HPD police shootings. At least you want another body besides HPD doing that, or HCSO, or whoever.
Well, here's the thing. I don't always agree with the investigation, the investigative conclusions. That's why we do our own investigation, meaning we review all the evidence. I do trust them to collect the evidence, to take the statements, but I think the public's anger and state of mind about independent review would be better served with some qualified independent group who could do that. Many times the Texas Rangers are called in, or sometimes HPD will ask the SO, or the SO will ask HPD to investigate their shootings. I have found that we see mostly comprehensive investigations done by law enforcement, but they don't always draw the conclusion that a crime has occurred. And in truth, we take that question to the community, because I don't think the community trusts us to make unilateral decisions either. And I believe in empowering our community to act on these police shootings by giving them the information, the law, and shepherding it through so that they know it's authentic. It's not like we're somebody in the public who shows up with a piece of evidence. We're the DA's office. We've collected it from the people who collected it at the scene. We've ensured that the chain of custody is good, that the scientific tests are good, but we ultimately give them the power, them meaning regular people in our community sitting on a grand jury, to decide whether they believe a police shooting is justified or a crime. Now, part of the problem, Doug, is the laws are very different in the state. We have to either charge a police officer with murder or aggravated assault or nothing. Whereas in the federal system, if somebody's civil rights are violated, they can charge them with that. It's easier for a jury to understand a policeman went overboard in his use of force than it is for a jury to believe that police officer meant to murder that man. So our laws, I believe, need to be made more parallel with federal law.
Good question coming in here from someone watching right now. What kind of conversations did you have with your staff about the protesters a few weeks ago during the George Floyd demonstrations? What did you say to your staff about how those protesters should be handled after they were arrested? Anything?
Yes, well, I handled, many of us were up for about 4 or 5 days off and on handling the different protests that occurred. We worked hand in hand with local law enforcement, which was mostly led by HPD, and we had a team at our 24-hour intake. And part of that team, a special response group of prosecutors, went out with police so they could see what was happening on the street and advise them there. So I had personal communication with the chief of police about the protesters and about whether or not at the end of the protest, after the speeches were done and basically free speech had been exercised, there were a group of people who simply didn't want to leave. They wanted to block the freeway or a roadway. They were making a statement. And those people we authorized arrests on. And what did I tell my prosecutors? I said, take a look at the cases Anybody who committed an intentional act of violence or destruction, we're going to continue to prosecute. The other protesters, we're going to look at whether or not we're going to dismiss them. I held them for about a week, talked with the police, talked to and the chief talked to the police officers who'd been injured. Those folks were assured, people who injured them, their cases were going to be prosecuted. But the bulk of the people who simply blocked the roadway, we felt like the protesters, that we had spared the city of additional danger of those people being hurt or committing violence in the city, and that the protesters had behaved well. There wasn't a lot of resisting arrest. There wasn't a lot of evading. And so we dismissed those cases. We looked at it as a win-win. Everybody made their statement, and now we're running Make It Right, where those same protesters, if they want to come get that case expunged or non-disclosed, they actually have an avenue to do it. We can't expunge it, but we are reinvesting drug forfeiture money to pay for a nonprofit who will represent them in conjunction with our office so that they can clean up their records.
So as you probably read, the protests up in Portland especially have become increasingly violent. And it's someone today in the New York Times described it as it's becoming a nightly fight, and it's getting increasingly violent. Are you at all concerned that could happen here in Houston? Is the character of the city different in some way from Portland, that you think we're safe from that sort of activity here?
I think it's important to recognize that the danger to become a city with chronic violence exists every minute of every day. That's why I ran for DA. I don't want our city to be like that. And I believe that we enjoy a great quality of life that's worthy of our hard work and protection. So I do think it's a clear and present danger. But I also have great trust and faith in Houstonians. We worked through the George Floyd protest. Chief Acevedo did a fine job. I know his motives are questioned. All of our motives are questioned. I will say thank you to Chief Acevedo for working with the protesters. I thank the mayor. I thought he did a great job working with the protesters. I appreciate the rappers, Bum B and Trey the Truth. They did a great job. So I think that our city is always capable of seeing the same negative things befall it as happen elsewhere. But we work together here. We did it after the riots at Moody Park. Civil rights leaders did it, led by, great Reverend William Lawson and others in this city after the riots in Alabama. So our city is used to working together. It's what I like best about it. So I'm determined, along with the rest of law enforcement, and I hope every person on this call, not to let that happen in our city. I believe in and for peaceful protests and the free exercise of speech, and just not for senseless violence, not against anyone. So that's what I see, Doug. I think to some degree the president's incited that by sending federal troops, and I'm against that.
Question coming in from people who are watching this event. Have you had any conversations with Chief Acevedo or Sheriff Gonzalez about their hiring processes? Well,
Chief Acevedo holds a position of leadership in the National Major City Chiefs Organization, and Sheriff Gonzalez is a very respected sheriff here in Texas and nationally. And I'm not super familiar right now with their hiring processes, but I represented a number of police in private practice in employment disagreements and in civil rights cases where they felt there was discrimination in those departments. So I don't know exactly where that question is headed, but we do talk about our staff a lot because we rely upon our staff to carry out what the public has either they have elected me to do, and I think they've elected Sylvester Turner to do certain things that he then works through Chief Acevedo to accomplish. So that's what I know.
Do you think that the makeup, and I'm asking you questions about departments over which you have absolutely no authority, but do you think that the makeup of our law enforcement agencies in general in Harris County reflect the population, or do we need greater diversity? At one time, it was largely white, and there was a largely rural feel to it, to be honest. What do you think? Do you think now our law enforcement agencies reflect the population?
Not yet. I think that we can do better. I think that it would be important to me as a chief, or it is important to me now as the top law enforcement official in Harris County, that the district attorney's office reflect the population. And we do. We're not only ahead of other DA's offices in the state, we're ahead of the local bar and the big firms in terms of diverse population employees. That's intentional. I'd like to see that same effort from local law enforcement leaders at every agency in Harris County. And I'd like to see officers live in Harris County. I think skin in the game is important. It's not mandatory right now, and I'd like to see an increase in that. Whether they make it mandatory or not, it's not up to me, but we should have people who want to be here in Houston, not just who come here to make a living.
Interesting question coming in here. Can you discuss for a moment the process of releasing body cam footage? Now, this is a police and law enforcement decision, but what are your thoughts on that, on when body cam footage should be released and under what circumstances?
It's I think it should be released on a case-by-case basis by the chief of the law enforcement agency who actually recorded the body cam footage. Body cam footage is not an end-all. Some say it's like looking at a movie through a straw, that the perspective is extremely limited. But I think because community trust is so shaken, and the relationship between especially communities of color and law enforcement is so tenuous right now, that the sooner they release body cam footage, the better in most cases. Certainly there will be some cases where, because of the evidence in a case or because they're not sure what occurred, investigators will want to hold information back. We should have, and police should have, the option of doing that, and they do now. But when body cams themselves were introduced, they were introduced in response to the incident in Ferguson, and they were promoted as the way police were going to become more trusted by communities. We're going to have increased transparency. We haven't seen that. I'm for increased transparency. I'm for their release. I will say that when they're given to me, like every other item received by me from an agency, we receive it as evidence. We're going to release it to the defense because that's our legal obligation. But we're not going to release it to the public because we're trying for a fair trial. I just don't want our office to be utilized as a shield, someone saying, DA's office won't let me release it. I want to have a case-by-case analysis, and we'll tell you if we're for it or against it.
One of the
body cam footage release in Nicholas Chavez case. But I do want to make a comment on that. What's been released by the city is a compilation of videos with a narrative by Chief Acevedo. This is not the same as a release of raw footage. I'm actually for release of raw footage. That's what many cities are doing. Many presumptively do it within a month. I think that would give the public some comfort room. And if there's a specific reason for law enforcement not to release it, and we can articulate that, then that would be an exception. So as you can see, I'm really for general rules, Doug, with legal exceptions.
So let me ask you about that particular case. Do you think that Chief Acevedo has selectively released certain video to create a narrative that you think is incorrect? Do you think the public is being deceived in some way?
Not at all. That's not what I said. But
okay, I misunderstood you. I beg your pardon.
Raw footage is quite different than edited pieces of 70 different cameras. I think they did that to increase public awareness. But when you put a narrative with it, it does have an impact. This is not the same as raw footage. So it's not that I'm for it or against it. What I'm saying is that's not actually what we get. We get raw footage. And that's what we use in trial. So it depends on what the public wants.
Very general question, soft across the plate here coming in. What's the message you'd like communities of color to know about your office?
That we believe, understand, and acknowledge that the criminal justice system has been used in a racially discriminatory way. I also believe that communities of color are those who are most victimized by crime, and that what we need is a system that protects the process for everybody, applies law equally to everybody so that we don't have double standards, one for police, one for everybody else, one for whites, one for rich, one for poor, one for blacks. That must end. And when you have a system that's run by people, it's not going to be perfect. You'll still be frustrated. Change can't happen fast enough in certain ways. But what I want communities of color to know is that we in law enforcement need to try. And I'm committed to trying to improve our system from within so that it works better for everyone. I firmly believe every community needs public safety to truly live a free life. If we can't let our children play in the yard, we're not very free. We can't go to the store without getting robbed, we're not very free. So I want to protect the incredible life we have by getting the few people who would harm us on a regular basis for greed or money or anger, by getting them off the street. I just want to protect us, but I don't want to do it at the expense of people's civil rights. We have to have a balanced approach. That's what I want communities of color to know about the Ogg administration, that I truly believe in practice.
Pardon me, that's my my dog's apparently excited by something here. So
He was my speech, Doug.
I know. Yes, he's calling
Who
you
let
out.
the dogs out?
So October, Domestic Violence Month. What is your office doing to protect victims of domestic violence?
Well, during COVID, everybody listen up. We're all at increased risk in our own households. Our parents or loved ones who might be in aging facilities are at risk. Our animals are more at risk. Our elderly friends and family are more at risk of fraud and abuse. And it's because we're isolated and we're packed together in our own homes. And this means the risk of problems between us escalating into violence is greater than ever. So what I want people to know is that during the time of COVID, you can still get help from police, you can still get help from the Houston Area Women's Center, and you can still get help from the DA's office. Even if you haven't made a case, you didn't want to call in your situation, but you do feel like you need protection legally from that person. You don't want that person coming to your place of employment or to your home. You can still get a protective order, even without having filed a criminal case, and you can do it through our office. And I think that alone is really helpful, especially to communities that are being shoved into the shadows, Muslim communities, Latino communities, those who are really, really afraid to engage with the police. Just know we can still bring legal protection and relief even without a police report.
So I asked a number of people what question they would ask you, just folks I know who are involved in public policy and people who are active in democratic politics and so on. And a theme kept coming up. And it was simply this, that you came in as a reformed DA, but now you've taken some positions that many progressives don't like. And I guess the theme more than anything else was they expected you to be more progressive. So let me pose this question to you. Do you think that, fine, the positions you advocated when you came into office 4 years ago or perhaps ahead of the curve, but now you're falling behind the progressive curve. Do you think that's
No,
the
there's
case?
just some groups who just you can't do enough fast enough to actually get a positive comment. Let me challenge all those people who say we haven't done enough to tell you 10,000 fewer people a year are arrested and prosecuted for marijuana. 3,000 fewer crack residue offenders are now prosecuted. Thousands of drug offenders with cases under 4 grams now receive treatment. More than 3,000 mentally ill offenders have been diverted not into jail, away from jail and into the Ed Emmett Diversion Center. But you know what I'm big on? I'm big on working across the aisle with everybody in government, Republicans, people from other counties, anybody who will help us solve the truly complex problems that reveal themselves in the intersectionality between life and the justice system, meaning the cops get called. And so we've done a great deal to change the culture internally and to change the experience of low-level offenders externally. We're making great strides in holding police officers accountable at huge risk to my prosecutors and to all of us who are not afraid to stand up and apply the law equally. So there'll always be naysayers. And to those of you who I haven't done enough for, in the next 4 years, we're going to make even more progress. And what I'd like to say is, let's take another look at that cup. Let's see how it's really half full, how we can work together. And come on, folks, identity politics and labels about progressive and conservative, the Republicans started that. And they started weaponizing that back when I grew up. You could sit down with your family at the table and have a discussion that was civil. Now we act like we hate each other if we disagree. That's got to stop. We need a more civil, I think, approach to our democracy. And I believe Road Women actually offers that. Diane Mosier was welcoming to me, even though I had run in a different party, even though I was gay, even though I was a woman in law enforcement, even though I was over 50. And I think that Diane Mosier was interested in inclusion. And that's what I'm interested in, because that's how our democracy survives.
So our hour is winding to a close here. But Kat, before you interrupt and cut us off here, I want to pose one question to you. The most dramatic difference I think I've seen in the DA's office from the days of Johnny Holmes to today is we're far fewer people from Harris County ending up on death row. Give me the number. How many people have been sentenced to death since you've been DA? And I'm wondering if you could ever consider, if you're truly progressive, not pursuing the death penalty for convicted murderers.
Well, I am truly progressive, but I take an oath to, and have a duty to follow the law as the legislature passed it. And right now, Texas has a death penalty. We've used it twice. When I came into office, there were 93 people on death row. 4 have been executed in 3 years. I've eliminated the execution of the mentally retarded individuals on death row. I've agreed to the actual innocence of Alfred Brown and others, 2 brothers wrongfully convicted by former Officer Gerald Goins. And we've gone a long way in being very judicious. The only death penalty cases that we've sought and received the death penalty on were on people who committed basically mass murder of a family, did so intentionally and without remorse. And juries are the ones who levied those verdicts. And I respect juries. And I respect Texas juries. And it doesn't make me any less progressive that I follow the law and that I respect juries. What I would say is I believe in the separation of powers. And if we want to end the death penalty, we have to do it in the halls of the legislature. And in states
Would you support that? Would you support that? You have a voice. Would you speak in favor of eliminating the death penalty in Texas?
Well, probably. I can't tell you exactly, since it hasn't yet been promoted in any way that could win. But I can tell you, I don't know that it deters people. I think it's, expensive. I will say, though, Doug, there are some instances where people torture one another to death, commit mass murder. enjoy the demise of another person, and a jury wants to, exercise the ultimate penalty, they still have that choice. But I do think that the death penalty is on its way out. I don't see that it survives this century. I really don't. And I am a Christian. I am of that faith, and the Bible's pretty clear about the death penalty. So I would tell you that I'll do my duty, but I think that you would expect to hear from me if it's suggested to the legislature and there's a chance of it winning, that it doesn't really deter people, it does punish them, and that we could do without it. Life without parole punishes people a great deal.
Well, all right, Kim Ogg, real pleasure speaking with you. Thanks so much. Kat, thanks for inviting both of us to speak to the Road Women tonight.
Oh my goodness, thank you guys so much. It was a really informative, a lot of passionate discussion going on in the background. So thank you, DA Ogg, for your time tonight. And you can see on the ticker across the bottom, if you want to become a road woman, or like Life Hatlin, our treasurer, has said, there are men too, you can go to roadwomen.com and join us. And I just want to again thank you, Doug, and thank you, DA Ogg, for being here tonight. It was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Kat, thank you. Doug, thanks for the interview. Road Women, stay strong. Let's go win in November.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good night, everybody.